Like we promised you that we're going to be joined by Pastor Bill Dindi, and he is from River of God Church. I hope that we're going to be having great conversations today, courtesy of the role of the church in leadership and also governance. And I am just hoping that you're going to learn a lot from this conversation. I hope that you are ready. This is Pound Radio, the home of fresh and classic hits. Karibu sana Pasi.
Thank you very much.
It's good to see you. Karibu sana.
Asante sana.
Introduce yourself. Tell us who is Bill Dindi. I know that maybe there's someone who is listening in for the first time.
Okay. So my name is Bill Dindi. Like you shared, I work with the River of God Church. I also teach at the International Leadership University. I'm married to Nancy, and we are blessed with 3 kids.
Oh.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Karibu sana. And this is a topic for discussion. We were talking with Joaneka just the other day that it's so timely, and we have a big problem, and we have something that we really need to talk about, and that is actually the role of the church in leadership. And maybe you can take us through the whole thing about the role of leadership and church, politics, and all these things.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this is a very pertinent conversation. It's important to say that now, first and foremost. So thank you for even seeing it fit for us to have this conversation at such a time as this, with the elections around the corner, and there's all this talk about leadership. And there's been a lot of confusion regarding just what exactly the role of the church should be. A German theologian called Dietrich Bonhoeffer, around the time during the Second World War, underwent a very unfortunate experience. Hitler had just come into power with the Nazi Party, and he was very anti-Semitic. People knew that. Jews were being shoveled off into the concentration camps and all. And around the world, people were asking, how should the German church respond? And Bonhoeffer very famously said, he believed that the church should not only bandage the wounds of those who are downtrodden by the wheels of injustice, they should also drive spokes through that wheel. And of course, that was a very controversial stance, but he believed it. And a couple of years into Hitler's madness, he went ahead and took part in a conspiracy to assassinate Hitler. And he was a theologian, he was a pastor, he was a preacher, but he was like, I cannot just be quiet as I watch millions literally die. Long story short, the conspiracy was discovered, and unfortunately, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was one of those who was assassinated. And so that incident sparked lots of conversations around to what extent should the church and church leaders be involved in politics and political leadership. And so maybe just to help, I thought it's important for us to take a bit of a historical journey. Yes. How did we get here? The history of the church and politics and all. So beginning with the Old Testament, the Bible is replete with lots of insights and wisdom on the subject of leadership. Ancient Israeli society was centered around 3 offices: the office of the king, the office of the priest, and the office of the prophet. So you could use 3 P's to describe those offices. The king, that's a potentate, that the kings reigned. Then you had the priests, who basically served to reconcile people, in a sense, through the sacrificial system, connecting people to God. And then you had the office of the prophet, who was basically like the oracle. He was relaying God's oracles to the people. And those offices were distinct. And as we go through the Old Testament, there are lots of wisdom and insights that we get from how the kings and political leaders then led their deeds and misdeeds and all. There's lots of nuggets there that we could get. But when we come to the New Testament, we find the ultimate definition and perfect representation of what proper leadership ought to be in Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ holds all the 3 offices at the same time. He is both priest and king and prophet, and he models to us what God's ideals for leadership is. Now, after Jesus lives, we come into the era of the church fathers. And during that 1st, 2nd, 3rd century, Christianity was considered a sect of Judaism, and it was illegal. It was illegal to practice this faith. The Romans particularly, and the Roman Empire was very antagonistic towards Christianity. This continues, and Christians were burnt at the stake, and there was all that until around 313 AD, when an emperor, a Roman general called Constantine, surrenders himself to the lordship of Christ, or so it seemed. He said he had a vision and was told, by this you shall conquer, and this meant the cross. And so he professes Christianity, and that is when the official relationship between church, politics, and the state began, so to speak. And so in 313 AD, Constantine issues what is called the Edict of Milan, and through that edict there was official toleration of Christianity by the state. And because he had become a Christian himself, Christianity was the favored religion of the state. And so with the passage of time, if you wanted to get into any political office, or you wanted to be in favor with the powers that be in Rome, you needed to be a Christian. And so there were lots of fake converts and all that. And unfortunately, that led the church down a path where there was lots of corruption, and there's lots of evil that was perpetuated and propagated within the church because of that dalliance and marriage with the Roman elite. Now, one of the things that Constantine did was he divided Rome into two centers of power, so to speak. One was, and the other one was Constantinople, rather, in modern day Turkey. And so the seat of political power ended up being Constantinople. He moved his office to Constantinople, and the religious center became Rome. And so over time, the Bishop of Rome, who came to be known as the Pope, would be the power in Rome, and the emperor would be the power in Constantinople. Now, as you'd imagine with any such scenarios where you have two centers of power and they both are equally strong, over time those brushes would begin to happen, and that's what began to occur. There was lots of tension between those two arms. And unfortunately, the Arabs, around the 500 ADs, Muhammad and his team, they began to mobilize and to attack other people groups and nation states. And their first target ended up being Constantinople. And unfortunately, Constantinople fell. Modern day Turkey fell to the Arabs. And so that was in the east. But in the west, the barbarian hordes from Europe, northern Europe, the Vikings from the north, they descended down on Rome and they conquered Rome. And because the political seat was in Constantinople, they did not have much of opposition. And so they began to reign in Rome. But something interesting happened, because the Bishop of Rome was such a powerful political or quasi-political figure that he was able, unlike in the East, he was able to negotiate with the barbarians, and they came into this sort of understanding. And over time, it has been said that while the barbarians conquered Rome, Christianity conquered the barbarians. The Christian message, the barbarians were non-believers, but the Christian message sat well with them. And so they converted to Christianity. So we had a situation where the barbarians have the instruments of power, but the real power behind the throne was the Bishop of Rome or the Pope. And so around the 600s, while the East had collapsed completely and capitulated to the Arabs and the Muslims, now we had the West that was basically thriving. The Pope was even more powerful now, because yes, there was a king who was a barbarian, and those the Franks, the Germans, and all began ruling. But the power behind the throne was the church. And so we had what was called historically the Holy Roman Empire now, where the church is now reigning. Basically, they could do anything they wanted to, and the kings would do what the church wanted them to do. In fact, there's a story around the 700s where a king from Germany called, he was at the time the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, King Henry IV. He did something the church did not like. And you know what the Pope did? The Pope got, for him to get forgiveness, he required the emperor to come and kneel in front of his house for 3 days. And that is what the emperor did. So that's how powerful the church was. And as you can imagine, with great power again comes all the challenges that they had before, only that now there was no opposition. And so this continued until the time of the Reformation. Around the 1500s, where people would look at the church and all the corruption in the church and the chaos and messes, and they were like, no, something needs to give. This is not the true gospel. And so, long story short, we had the likes of Martin Luther, the German theologian, together with others who challenged the church, and the Protestant Reformation began. And so we moved into a space where, while much of southern France, southern Europe continued to be Catholic, much of Northern Europe continued to, embraced Protestantism. Yeah, they became Protestants. And so you found, we got into a situation where, while you had political leaders, even in the north, the guys who are really the software that ran the hardware called political leadership was the church. So we had kings who were supported by the church. The church prayed them into power and all that. And if they had any issues, they would always defer back to the church. And that's basically the era that we got into. Around the time now for colonialism and stuff like that. Colonialists came and they were sent by guys who were pretty much church folk, you know.
And you've said something really interesting about the church being powerful. Is it happening right now? Is the church in Kenya really powerful? Because we are having leaders in a church, you know, going for positions in the government. Is it even advisable? And as we are the church, you know, what is actually your opinion about that?
Okay.
Yeah.
And so when we got into the colonialists, the era of the colonialists and stuff like that, that marriage was really cemented. And really what we are seeing today are vestiges of the same. It is the political, what we inherited from the colonialists is what is running our country today. So that for anyone who wants to truly get into positions of power and leadership, increasingly, they would need to befriend the church. Now, in Kenya here, the relationship has probably not been as solid as, say, in Uganda. You know, the Ugandan president has been known, particularly through the wife, to have some very strong links with the church. In places like Nigeria, in West Africa, we have, of course, this split. The northern is predominantly Muslim, the southern is predominantly Christian. And so for anyone to really get into political leadership, they need to embrace the church. And so we are in that situation in Kenya today as well, increasingly, where any serious political leader must somehow ensure the church is happy. So, you know, issues about taxation of the church and all are no goes-ons in our political discourse today. Now, is it okay for church leaders to get into politics? When I started this conversation, particularly looking at the Old Testament, there was that very explicit and clear split where you had the office of the priest and the office of the king, and they were separate. And I think there is wisdom in having that separation, because when that separation is there, then the church can be able to be a prophetic voice to the political leadership. When they mess up and do things that are unbecoming, we can speak truth to power.
We should be the voice.
But only when there is that clear demarcation. So should we get into politics? If called to be a politician, I think you should hang your hat as bishop or pastor and get into politics and campaign. But if not, I think it's important for us to maintain as pastors and leaders of the church and allow the politicians to do their thing, but we speak truth to power.
We are predominantly a young country, if I would say. And most of the people who are even, when you want to smama, we've seen the MCAs, the women representatives, and all these people who are planning to get into leadership are young people. What would you say is our role as the youth? Because you find that there's so many people who are maybe quote unquote demotivated into voting, and they're like, if my person is not asimami na ile chama yenye mimi nataka, I won't vote. And you find that we are messing ourselves by saying that we won't go to the ballot, because at the end of the day, that is our role as Kenyans. So is the church having, for example, programs where we are talking to the young people about leadership? Much as we're talking about let's pray for the leaders, are we also telling them that it's important for us to take a step and ensure that we are praying the right people into leadership and also voting for them? Yeah.
Well, I can't speak for the entire church.
Yes.
I would say that there are a good number of churches that are intentionally doing this.
Yes.
And they need to be celebrated. You're right. In fact, a couple of years ago, the Institute for Economic Affairs, I think, came up with some survey that indicated 69% of Kenya is 25 and below. That's significant. I see two ways that we can reap into this youth dividend as a nation, and particularly with the church spearheading this. Number one, I think mobilizing young people to vote is very strategic. Teach them on what the right attributes for leaders are, what we should aspire for, what we should espouse, some of those values and virtues, and then get these young people who have been so trained to place their vote. So it's important for the church to be advocating for people to vote. Yeah. And we need to amplify voices of the churches that are doing that. But number two, we also need to challenge young people to stand for elective positions. If young people decided to take their votes today, all of us, and we decided that person X will become president,
our target.
And as a and as a group, we all voted in person X, they will get into power. So how about the youth identifying some of those leaders that hold the values that we also uphold, and intentionally voting in these people? And we want people who have the right kind of values, and we could identify those people. So I think encourage youth to vote, but number two, also encourage youth to vie for elective positions.
Many youths will complain about not having finances and everything to campaign.
Financial instability. How are we going to, do the campaigns when you don't have? But I like what you said, because at the end of the day, when you get to understand that when you get to understand God, and we have all these people who have a relationship with God and they're in positions of leadership, particularly leadership and governance in the country, I think we'll end up being a very strong country, if I would say. You find that all these other small issues that we're having as a nation, we won't be having them. So I think that is very, very important.
And look, while talking about money and it being an impediment, frankly, the Kenyan electorate has changed. If you look at the landscape and how things are, Kenyan electorate is different. Look, in the last elections, we had under 25, I think he was a 23-year-old guy who ran for MP without money. He did not even have a car.
From Meru, I think.
From Meru. Mwirigi was his name, I think. People mobilized around him. They supported his candidature and voted him in. In Uasin Gishu County, somewhere in the Rift Valley, there's actually a lady, some girl who's vying, I think, for women rep. Who's also under 25, was voted in and supported by the people. So if young people have vision and they're able to articulate themselves, I think the electorate can actually support them financially even to vie. So the problem is not so much the absence of money, it's the absence of vision.
Wow.
Well and the conversation still continues. If you have your question, by the way, make sure that you text us on 0702969969. And we are the reflection of the leaders that we are choosing right now, as a country, as a nation, as an individual. And someone is asking, is it bad for a Christian to just declare that, Mimi, I am supporting this team and I'm supporting person X? Because I feel that most of the times as Christians, we shy away from this kind of conversation. I don't know why, but eventually you will vote. That's true. You are going to vote. But why don't we just publicly say that, me, I'm supporting Joannick, by the way. Kwa women rep na support Joannick. Why can't we just come out boldly and talk about these things, Well,
I think we should. I really think we should. We need to be able to interrogate our leaders, and we should be comfortable doing that in the public space as leaders. And I appreciate there's a couple of churches came together, and I think at the Nairobi Baptist a couple of weeks ago, they got different presidential candidates, got them together and just asked them questions, interrogated them. I think we need to have more of those. And then once we are convinced that person X would best serve the interests of the Kenyan populace, we could express our opinion. We have the democratic right to do so. But declare declaring as a church, as an entity that is diverse with people from multiple backgrounds and persuasions, that our church is supporting the candidature of X, I think that is wrong. But individuals within the church are free to express themselves. They are Kenyans, they have the democratic right. Yeah.
People feel like, I'm going to be judged because I'm supporting Pastor X or someone X. We have a comment here. Ifanta says, a country without a national integration is often implied as a country deprived of social cohesion and sense of nationalism with a failed socio-political economy. So the church should stand and approach for fostering institutional cohesion, sharing and devolution of power, rule of law, democracy, and participation of the people, human dignity, equality, inclusiveness, and non-discrimination, good governance, integrity. We have a transparency and also accountability.
Wow. Beautiful. Quick comment on that. There's a gentleman called Samuel Rutherford, who in 1644 wrote a fascinating book called, the short version of it is, because it was in Latin, Lex Rex. So there was this concept of either Lex Rex or Rex Lex. Lex Rex meaning the law is above the king, and Rex Lex means the king above the law. He, in a time when the kings were ruling and were powerful, he challenged that and said, no, we need to have the rule of law. And so what Ifantas is talking about, the church has been advocating for that. With the likes of him, we have people like William Wilberforce, who campaigned against slavery, the institution of slavery. In 1844, succeeded. We have people like Martin Luther King Jr. Against segregation. We have Desmond Tutu in South Africa against apartheid. So the church traditionally has held those values. And we have some champions who have spoken out against those social ills and pushed and vouched for social cohesion, which is something that this generation of the church needs to also embrace. We need champions who will stand up and challenge things that are going wrong and encourage some of these values of nationhood and togetherness. Yeah.
So the church should come up with programs. And I know that River of God, you've actually come up with some amazing programs. Like last week, you were having Youth Summit on spearheading transformation.
Yes.
And it was really, really successful. And we'll talk about that in just like a minute.
Yeah. So with that demographic reality, that 7 out of 10 Kenyans are 25 and under, we said many times when these leadership conversations are happening, we are discussing with people who frankly are not stakeholders. They are way over that 25 mark. So we said, how about we gather these under 25s together and talk leadership and amplify their voices. Let them share their concerns, and let's have people in the marketplace who can mentor, coach, and work with them, mobilized to do the same. And so we had our inaugural high school leadership summit, brought together leaders, about 200 of them from some 10 high schools, and just had a nice time of interaction and engaging. And we hope to keep doing this beyond this year. In subsequent years, this is something that as a church we are very keen in catalyzing.
Other programs coming up maybe?
Well, for the week, we have a few other engagements we'll be having with young people. This Friday, we'll be having a debate on why Christianity. We are in Parklands, which is a very multicultural area. So invite people from different persuasions and talk why Christianity. On Thursday, we'll be at the Westgate Mall. We'll be bowling and just chilling there and engaging in conversations with whosoever the Lord brings our way. On Saturday, we'll be having games in church the whole day, just chill, have fun, and engaging the community. There's a slum nearby called Deep Sea. And then on Sunday, we'll be having our Youth Sunday, whose culmination will be a concert that we are partnering with Power Radio.
Just.
So from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m., we'll be at church, River of God Church. All of you are welcome to join us.
Amazing. Asante sana. Wow,
Thank you.
That's amazing.
Thank you very much.
We are Pearl Radio.